Now we're going to look at what are called allotropes of carbon. An allotrope is different forms of an element or different forms of a compound or element in the same physical state, typically an element. So for example, we can have oxygen gas as O2, we can have ozone as O3, both in the gaseous state would be considered allotropes of oxygen. But we're going to talk about allotropes of carbon. There's lots of different ways you can find pure carbon. Some of them are crystalline and some of them are amorphous. Some of the amorphous ones you might be familiar with are charcoal and carbon, black carbon. Coke is another form of carbon. It's a little closer to coal. But we're not so much going to talk about the amorphous ones as we are the crystalline ones. Now, diamonds, I'm sure you're familiar with some of the properties of a diamond. Graphite, you're also familiar with. It's what you have as your pencil lead. And so you know intuitively some of the ways that diamonds are different from graphite. Diamonds are obviously a lot harder than graphite is. Graphite's a lot easier to break apart. We're going to talk about why that is in terms of their molecular structure in just a second. Another form in which you can find crystalline carbon is in Buckminster Fullerene, which is these soccer ball-like spheres, and that's something that's made in the lab, or what's called a carbon nanotube. And another one that would work in here is graphene. Graphene is used to form carbon nanotubes. Graphene would be in the sheet, carbon nanotube would be in the tube form. These guys conduct electricity, which means very small, light. Graphene and carbon nanotubes are both really lightweight, really thin, but can conduct electricity quite well. And so they can be really useful for a lot of nanotechnology applications. Graphite also conducts electricity, but it tends to fall apart a little bit easily. Diamonds do not conduct electricity. And here is some of the why in terms of the structure. If I look at a diamond, each carbon is bound 4 times to other carbons. And so we don't have any electrons that are free to move. If I were to look at the structure of graphite instead, each carbon is only attached to 3 other carbons. And so we have these hexagonal patterns that repeat throughout throughout sheets. Now, when we have tetrahedral bonds, those bonds go in 3 dimensions. Graphite, we have trigonal planar bonds, which are 120 degrees. And then a planar molecule is literally flat. So graphite is flat. And you'll notice that carbon doesn't have 8 electrons on it the way I drew it so far. Each carbon actually has 2 lone pairs associated with it. These lone pairs are free to move. We say that these are delocalized electrons. Delocalized means not fixed in one location. A delocalized electron is free to move through the structure. And therefore it conducts electricity. Diamonds don't have electrons that can move through the structure, therefore it can't conduct electricity. So one of the major differences there, the conduction of electricity, is explained by the delocalized electrons. One of the other differences is whether it's 3D or 2D, and that's explained by the bond angles and the number of things attached. What graphite actually does is we have I said it's planar and it's a sheet. And so we have a sheet of graphite, and then we have another sheet of graphite right on top of it, and then another sheet of graphite right on top of it. So when it conducts electricity, it can only conduct it laterally through a sheet and not so much from one sheet to the next, because the electrons generally don't jump across there. This is also one of the reasons graphite's a lot weaker, because it's in sheets. So when you're writing with a pencil and you write across a piece of paper, you're sliding the sheets of graphite off of here onto your paper. And so graphite has these planes that can break apart. The carbon nanotubes are going to be able to conduct electricity all the way down the tube, which makes it much more useful for different applications.